The year was 2754, and the human race had finally joined the Galactic Concord, an alliance of thousands of alien civilizations that ruled the stars. For centuries, humanity had dreamed of standing among the great powers of the universe. Now that day had come, but it was not an easy welcome. Humans were new, weak in the eyes of others. Most advanced races considered them impulsive, emotional, and too young to understand the balance of galactic politics. So when Earth was invited to send an ambassador to the Xenari Empire, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the Concord, many alien leaders thought it would end in humiliation for the humans. But Earth chose someone very special, Ambassador Elias Grant. Elias was not a warrior, nor a famous scientist. He was known for his calm nature and his ability to listen. At 42 years old, with calm brown eyes and a quiet smile, he was respected for one rare human quality, the ability to make others believe in hope. When Elias arrived at the Xenari homeworld, he saw something unlike anything he had imagined. The planet Xenar Prime shone like a blue-green jewel in space. Cities of crystal floated above oceans of silver mist. The skies shimmered with lights from hundreds of alien ships. As his transport descended toward the royal palace, Elias felt a sense of awe. He had read about the Xenari, tall, luminous beings with silver-blue skin, sharp eyes, and a deep sense of honor. They were proud, ancient, and formal. At the heart of the capital stood the crystal palace of Queen Zilara, the ruler of the Xenari Empire. It was said that the palace was older than Earth's written history. Its towers stretched high into the clouds, glowing softly under the twin suns. When Elias stepped into the palace hall, the air was filled with a quiet hum, a sound like distant music. Hundreds of alien nobles stood on both sides of the grand hall. They watched him in silence as he walked forward. To them, he looked fragile, small, ordinary, just a human. But Elias walked with calm steps. His dark formal coat was simple compared to the shining robes of the aliens, yet his posture carried quiet dignity. At the end of the hall stood Queen Zilara. She sat upon a throne of transparent crystal, her long robe flowing like starlight. Her eyes glowed faintly, a mark of her royal lineage. Her beauty was strange but captivating, like a sculpture carved from light. As Elias approached, she studied him carefully. There was no expression on her face. Around her, alien advisors whispered softly, unsure what to make of this human envoy. When he stopped before her throne, Elias bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said in a calm, steady voice, "I bring greetings from Earth and from all humankind." His translator chip repeated the words in the Xenari tongue. The queen tilted her head slightly. Her voice when she spoke was smooth and cool. "Human of Earth, your kind has joined our Concord, though your world is young. Tell me, why do humans seek to walk among the stars? What gives your people the right to stand beside empires 1,000 times older?" The hall grew silent. The question was more than a formality. It was a test. Many alien ambassadors had faced such challenges before and failed to answer without offending the queen. But Elias did not hesitate. He looked up at her calmly and said, "Because we have learned to stand on our own even when no one believed we could." A soft wave of murmurs moved through the court. Some aliens frowned. Others raised their brows in surprise. Elias continued, his voice firm but gentle. "We were born on a small world. For most of our history, we were alone with no one to guide us. We fought, we made mistakes, and we learned from them. We built ships not because it was easy, but because we refused to stay in the dark. We came here not to rule or to take, but to understand and to share what it means to be human." For a moment, silence filled the hall. Queen Zilara's bright eyes flickered. It was rare for anyone to speak with such honesty before her, especially a being from a lesser world. She leaned slightly forward, curious. "You speak as if your people's weakness is their strength," she said softly. Elias nodded. "Perhaps it is, Your Majesty. We are fragile, yes, but that makes us value life more. We are short-lived, but that makes us treasure every day. We are small, but we dream without limits." The Queen's advisors exchanged glances. One of them, a tall Xenari general with a shimmering crest on his forehead, stepped forward and said sharply, "Your Majesty, this human speaks of emotion, not logic. He offers words, not proof. What value do dreams hold in the cold order of the stars?" Elias turned to the general and bowed slightly. Dreams are where every great empire begins, General. Even yours, the general froze, unsure how to respond. The court broke into hushed whispers. For the first time, a faint smile touched Queen Zalara's lips, just for a moment. It was almost invisible, but her attendants noticed it immediately. No one could remember the last time she had smiled during a council. After the ceremony, Elias was invited to stay in the palace as a guest of honor. It was a gesture few aliens ever received. His quarters were luxurious. A tall window overlooked the city of glass towers, and the air carried the soft scent of luminous flowers. But Elias felt restless. He knew this was just the beginning. That evening, the queen summoned him to a private meeting. When he entered her chamber, she stood beside a grand balcony looking out at the twin suns setting over the horizon. "Your words today stirred my court," she said without turning. "Some think you are foolish. Others think you are bold. I have not decided which you are." Elias smiled politely. "Perhaps I am both, Your Majesty." The queen glanced at him. "Tell me, Ambassador, do you humans always speak so freely to rulers?" "Only when the truth is worth saying," he replied. There was a brief pause. Then unexpectedly the queen laughed softly, a rare, delicate sound like wind over glass. "Your courage is strange," she admitted. "Most beings fear offending me, yet you stand here as if I were your equal." "Not equal, Majesty," Elias said gently, "but I believe respect is stronger when it is honest." Her glowing eyes studied him again. She saw no arrogance in him, no hunger for power, only calm sincerity. For centuries, the Zanari had ruled through logic and tradition. Emotion was considered weakness. But this human, this simple envoy from a small blue world, spoke as if emotion was a kind of strength. It intrigued her. "Very well," the queen said at last. "You will stay in my palace for one cycle. During that time I will judge for myself what humans truly are." "I would be honored," Elias replied. That night, as the two moons of Xenar rose over the Crystal Palace, Elias looked out at the alien skyline and felt the weight of his mission. He was not a soldier or a hero, but somehow he had to show an entire empire that humanity was more than its weakness. He thought of Earth, its oceans, its laughter, its fragile peace. He thought of the countless people who had looked up at the stars and dreamed, and somewhere deep within the palace, Queen Zalara stood by her window too, watching the same stars. For reasons she could not explain, her thoughts returned again and again to the strange, calm human who had dared to look into her eyes without fear. Days turned into weeks inside the Crystal Palace of Xenar. Ambassador Elias Grant quickly became the most talked about being in the royal court. The alien nobles whispered about him in the hallways. Some admired his courage. Others called him foolish for speaking so boldly to their queen. No one could quite understand him. He was not like the other ambassadors. He had no armies, no fleets, and no promises of wealth. Yet he carried himself with a calm strength that made even the proudest nobles hesitate before mocking him. And above them all, Queen Zalara watched him with quiet interest. Each morning, Elias was invited to attend the queen's court sessions. There, surrounded by her advisors and ministers, he listened to debates about trade, science, and the endless politics of the galaxy. At first he stayed silent, observing how the Xenari ruled. Their system was based entirely on logic. Every law, every order, every decision had to be proven by reason. Emotion was seen as a flaw that clouded judgment. To Elias, it felt cold. One morning, the queen turned to him during a discussion about a border dispute. "Human," she said, her voice calm but firm. "If two empires both claim the same star system and neither will yield, what is the logical choice?" Elias thought for a moment. "I suppose the logical choice would be to divide it equally," he said. "Correct," said one of the advisors proudly. "That is how Xenari law has handled such matters for ages." Elias hesitated, then added, "But logic is not always peace. If both sides are forced to take less than what they believe is fair, anger remains. Division may solve the map, but not the hearts." The room went silent. One advisor frowned. "You suggest we consider emotion in law?" Elias nodded slowly. "I suggest that understanding emotion prevents future conflict. A wise ruler doesn't only measure balance in numbers, but also in trust." Queen Zalara's bright eyes narrowed slightly. "And what would a human know of ruling?" she asked, but there was a faint curiosity in her tone. Elias gave a small smile. Maybe not much, Majesty, but I know what it feels like to be ignored, to have no voice. Humanity once lived that way, fighting to be heard. And we learned that peace built on fairness lasts longer than peace built on fear. The court erupted in whispers again. Some aliens laughed softly, others looked thoughtful. The Queen raised her hand and silence returned. Very well, she said. Then perhaps you should show us what this human fairness means. The next day, the Queen announced a challenge of wisdom, a traditional Zenari test used to measure the intellect and moral strength of a visiting diplomat. No human had ever been invited to participate before. It consisted of 3 trials: logic, empathy, and judgment. The court gathered in the grand chamber as Elias stood before a glowing platform. Queen Zalara sat upon her throne, her gaze unreadable. If you pass these trials, she said, you will prove that humanity is not guided only by emotion. If you fail, your words will be forgotten. Then I will do my best to honor both reason and heart, Elias replied softly. The first trial. Logic, a complex holographic puzzle, appeared before him. Dozens of glowing symbols floated in the air, each representing mathematical and spatial patterns. Elias studied them quietly while alien observers whispered about how impossible it was for a human mind to solve Zenari logic, sequences. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Then he began to connect the patterns, not through the formulas displayed, but through their rhythm. After several minutes, the puzzle shifted into a single glowing sphere. The Queen raised an eyebrow. You solved it faster than expected. Elias smiled faintly. Sometimes, Majesty, logic is just patience wearing a different name. A few nobles chuckled quietly, impressed. The second trial, empathy. This trial was far more unusual. The Queen presented 3 holograms: a starving village, a wounded soldier, and a dying forest. You can only save one, she said. The other 2 will fall. What is the wise choice? Elias stared at the images. He could sense the test. This was meant to measure emotional control. A Zenari would choose based on logic alone, calculating which outcome caused the least loss. But Elias answered differently. I would save the one that gives hope to the others. The Queen frowned slightly. Explain. If I save the village, the people will rebuild the forest. If I save the soldier, he will fight for the village. But if I save the forest, all will live again. Hope grows like roots, it spreads. The Queen leaned back in thought. Her advisors whispered among themselves. It was not the answer they expected, but somehow it felt right. Your logic is unusual, she said finally. Because it comes from the heart, Elias replied gently. The third trial, judgment, the final test, was personal. The Queen herself asked the question. Imagine you stand before 2 leaders, one who seeks peace but lacks power and one who has power but no mercy. Which will you support? Elias paused, looking directly at her. Neither, he said softly. Neither, the Queen repeated, surprised. Because peace without strength cannot last and power without mercy destroys itself. I would choose a third path, to teach them both what they are missing. There was silence. Then for the first time in many years, Queen Zalara smiled openly. A strange answer, but a wise one, she said. You have passed all 3 trials, Ambassador Grant. The court broke into applause, slow at first, then stronger. The nobles bowed their heads respectfully. For the first time in Zenari history, a human had passed the challenge of wisdom. Later that evening, the Queen invited Elias to a private dinner in the royal garden. The glowing plants reflected blue and silver light across the water. Strange birds floated above them, singing soft tones that sounded like music. You have impressed many in my court, she said as they walked beside a fountain. Even my generals speak of you with respect. You should be proud, Elias smiled humbly. I'm grateful, Majesty, but I only spoke what I believed. That is what makes you different, she said softly. Most who come to this palace tell me what I want to hear. You tell me what I need to hear. He looked at her curiously. And what do you need to hear, Majesty? For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she turned to the glowing horizon. That perhaps logic alone cannot rule a heart, she said quietly. Elias understood that behind her calm voice there was loneliness, a burden carried by a ruler who could never show weakness. Sometimes, he said gently, It takes emotion to keep wisdom alive. The queen looked at him then, her silver eyes reflecting the light of the twin moons. For a heartbeat, something passed between them, something neither of them could name. Then she looked away. Your words are dangerous, human. If my council knew how they affect me, they would call it weakness. Truth is never weakness, Majesty, he replied softly. It's what makes us real. That night, the queen stood alone on her balcony after Elias had left. The stars above her glittered like diamonds. She had met thousands of diplomats, philosophers, and rulers, but none had spoken to her like this human. He was not trying to impress her. He was simply being himself, honest, kind, and brave enough to care. And somehow that frightened her more than any enemy ever had. Weeks passed peacefully in the Crystal Palace of Zynar. The alien courtiers had grown used to the human presence in their midst. Where once they whispered doubts, now they whispered respect. Ambassador Elias Grant had become something rare, a human who had won the ear of an alien queen. His calm nature, his words of compassion, and his unexpected wisdom had impressed even the most logical Zinari minds. But peace, as the universe often reminded them, was fragile. One morning, the Grand Hall trembled slightly as the palace's emergency alarms began to hum. A deep red light filled the ceiling. The guards rushed through the corridors. From her throne, Queen Zilara rose at once. Report, she commanded. A guard bowed low. Your Majesty, we've received word from the border colonies. The Vorath Dominion has begun advancing into our outer systems. The court fell silent. The Vorath were a name known across the stars, a race of warlike conquerors whose fleets left only ruins behind. They respected strength alone and viewed peace as weakness. How many systems? The queen asked. 3 already under siege, the guard replied. They refuse negotiation. They say the Zinari have grown soft. The queen's eyes flashed with cold light. Prepare the fleet, she said. They will learn that the Zinari are not weak. Before the guard could respond, Elias stepped forward. Majesty, he said calmly, forgive my boldness, but may I speak? The court turned toward him. This was no time for diplomacy, many thought. Yet the queen gave a small nod. You may speak, human. War may defend your pride, Elias said, but it will also cost your people dearly. You've built something beautiful here. Order, peace, wisdom. If you go to war now, you risk losing all of it. The queen looked at him sharply. You think I should do nothing while invaders take my worlds? No, he said softly. But there are other ways to fight than with weapons. The council erupted in protests. The human speaks nonsense, shouted one general. The Vorath understand only force, cried another. But the queen raised her hand, silencing them. Her eyes stayed fixed on Elias. What would you suggest, Ambassador? Elias took a breath. Let me speak to them. The hall went still. Then laughter broke out among some nobles. A single human will talk sense into the Vorath? Scoffed the general. He will not live long enough to finish his sentence. But Elias stood firm. They see the Zinari as cold, proud, and distant. They might listen to someone who doesn't fit that image, someone they underestimate. Queen Zilara studied him for a long moment. She knew it was madness, but there was something about this human's calm eyes that made her hesitate. If I allow this, she said slowly, and you fail, it could mean the loss of entire worlds. Then I must not fail, Elias replied simply. That night, the queen summoned him to her private chamber. The stars outside the balcony burned brighter than usual, as if watching. You realize the risk you take, she said quietly. The Vorath have destroyed diplomats before. They will not show mercy because you speak gently. Elias smiled faintly. I don't need mercy, Majesty. I just need them to listen. She walked closer, her glowing eyes softening. Why do you risk your life for people who are not your own? Because peace belongs to everyone, he said. If it breaks here, it will break everywhere. And if I can stop it even for a little while, then my life has meaning. The queen looked at him silently. His words touched something deep inside her, a warmth she had long forgotten. You are a strange creature, Elias Grant, she said softly, and perhaps a brave one. The next day, Elias stood aboard a Zinari command ship as it approached the border where the Vorath fleet waited. Their warships were massive, black vessels shaped like claws surrounded by clouds of red energy. He requested a direct communication link with the Vorath warlord. The officers hesitated, but the queen's order overruled them. When the screen came alive, the warlord appeared, a towering creature of stone-gray skin, heavy armor, and eyes that burned like fire. "Who dare speak to me?" he growled.
"Is this the voice of the Zenari Queen?"
Elias stepped forward. "No, warlord. I am Elias Grant of Earth." The warlord's laughter was like thunder. "A human? The weakest of the weak. Your kind is barely born among the stars. Why do you stand before me?" Elias did not flinch. "Because sometimes, warlord, the weak see things the strong do not." That silenced the room. Even the Vorath attendants turned to look. "Speak quickly, human," the warlord snarled. "Before I decide to end this talk and your ship." Elias's voice remained steady. "You say the Zenari have grown soft. But tell me, what does your strength bring you except endless war? You fight, you destroy, and still you are never at peace. You believe peace is weakness, but what if it's the highest form of strength?" The warlord leaned forward, scowling. "Peace builds nothing. War gives glory." "No," Elias said quietly. "War gives ashes. Peace gives legacy." For a moment, the Vorath leader stared at him in silence. Something in the human's words, his calmness, his courage, confused him. "You speak boldly for a small creature," the warlord said finally. "Why should I not crush you and take your world as well?" Elias looked straight into the camera. "Because if you destroy everything, there will be nothing left worth ruling." There was a long pause. Then, unexpectedly, the warlord gave a short, rough laugh. "You have courage, human, I will give you that. Perhaps there is more to your kind than bones and fear." He leaned back in his chair. "I will withdraw for now. But tell your queen this, if she grows weak again, I will return." The transmission ended. Inside the command ship, silence filled the room. Then cheers erupted. The officers looked at Elias in disbelief and admiration. He stopped them. One whispered. "By words alone," said another. Back on Zynar Prime, the Queen received the news with astonishment. For the first time in history, a war had been avoided not by fleets, but by the voice of a human. When Elias returned to the palace, the entire court awaited him. As he entered the grand hall, the nobles bowed their heads in respect. Queen Zilara rose from her throne. Her eyes shone not with power, but with quiet pride. "Ambassador Elias Grant," she said, her voice echoing through the hall. "You came to us as a stranger. You have shown us the strength of your heart. You have done what no army could." She stepped down from her throne and walked toward him. The court watched in silence. "You saved worlds, human," she said softly. "How did you find the courage to stand before such a monster without fear?" Elias smiled. "I was afraid, Majesty. But courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what must be done despite it." Her eyes softened. "Perhaps that is the lesson my people needed to learn." That evening, when the palace lights dimmed and the stars rose again, the Queen stood alone in her chamber. Through the window, she could see the faint blue shimmer of Earth in the distance, tiny, fragile, and beautiful. She thought of the human who had faced a warlord and won without a single weapon. And for the first time, she felt something she could not explain, something beyond logic, beyond reason, admiration, respect, and something gentler still, growing quietly in her heart. The next morning, she sent for Elias. When he entered, she looked at him in silence for a long time before speaking. "You have changed the way my people see your kind," she said, "and the way I see the stars." "I only did what anyone should," he replied modestly. "No," she said softly. "You did what no one else dared." Her voice trembled just slightly, though she hid it well. "You have earned the eternal respect of the Zenari Empire, Elias Grant." He bowed deeply. "Then humanity has honored your majesty." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Elias?" He looked back. The Queen hesitated for a moment, her usual composure fading. "You are different from anyone I have ever known," he smiled gently. "And you, Majesty, are the reason I still believe peace is possible." For a brief second, the world around them felt still. The Queen lowered her gaze, hiding the soft light in her eyes. Outside, the twin suns rose again, two lights shining side by side, different yet harmonious, and across the galaxy, tales began to spread of the human who spoke peace to monsters, and the Queen who listened to his heart. The Zenari court was buzzing with excitement. Weeks had passed since Ambassador Elias Grant had prevented war with the Vorath Dominion, and his fame had grown beyond anything the court had ever seen. Nobles spoke of him in whispers, curious, incredulous, even awed. A human had not only survived the court of the queen, but had changed the fate of an empire with nothing but his courage and words. The palace itself seemed to hum with anticipation. The crystal halls reflected shimmering lights in every corner, and the twin moons of Zinar cast soft silver glows over the grand balconies. Everyone could feel that something extraordinary was about to happen, and it would. That day, a grand ceremony was announced in the central hall of the palace, the largest chamber in the empire. Rows of glowing crystal seats were arranged in a circle around a central platform. Alien ambassadors from neighboring worlds had arrived. Advisors, generals, and nobles packed the hall, eager to witness the momentous occasion. Queen Zalara ascended her throne, her usual regal calm in place. She wore a robe of starlight silk that shimmered like liquid silver. Her glowing eyes scanned the court, finally resting on Elias, who stood near the center of the platform. He bowed respectfully. The hall fell silent. "Ambassador Elias Grant," the queen's voice rang clear, calm, yet commanding. "You have served the Zainari Empire with courage, wisdom, and honor beyond expectation. Today the court acknowledges your deeds and your humanity." There were polite claps from some nobles, hesitant murmurs from others, but the queen's eyes remained fixed on him. Then she stepped down from her throne, moving slowly toward him. The court fell completely silent. Even the hum of the palace seemed to pause. When she stopped before him, her voice dropped to something softer, almost private, yet still audible to everyone. "You came as an envoy from a young, fragile world. You arrived with no armies, no shields, no force to command. Yet you have shown strength the galaxy seldom sees. You have saved the lives of millions, not with power, but with your courage, your words, and your heart." The hall held its breath. Nobles and generals stared, unsure how to respond. Even the queen's closest advisors, who had seen centuries of political maneuvering, were stunned by the queen's intensity. Elias's calm eyes met hers. He bowed slightly, not in submission, but in deep respect. "Your Majesty, I only did what any human would do if given the chance." She smiled faintly, a delicate curve that seemed almost impossible for the Queen of Zinar. But then, something happened that nobody in the hall could have predicted. Her glowing eyes softened in a way that betrayed emotion, something Zinari rarely displayed in public. I wish you were my husband, human." The words echoed through the hall like a bolt of lightning. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps filled the chamber. Nobles froze in disbelief. Advisors clutched their robes. Even the queen's generals looked as though the world had shifted beneath their feet. To the Zinari, a queen speaking of personal desire, and for a human of all beings, was unthinkable. Elias felt his heart skip a beat. He had been praised, admired, even feared, but never had anyone confessed something like this to him, and certainly not in front of the entire court. He took a careful breath. 100 voices shouted questions and whispers in a language he barely understood. He could feel the eyes of the galaxy's most ancient and powerful beings on him. And yet, he remained calm. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "I am honored by your words. Truly I am. But perhaps what you wish for is not a husband, but a kindred spirit." The court went silent once again, hanging on his words. Queen Zalara's glowing eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She had not expected hesitation or modesty or gentle deflection. She had expected flattery, perhaps acceptance, but not this. "A kindred spirit?" she repeated quietly. Elias nodded. "Yes, Majesty. Companionship, understanding, trust. These are more lasting than titles or ceremony. If you wish for a human to stand beside you, then let it be as an ally of heart, mind, and purpose, not merely as a husband in name." For a long moment the queen looked at him in silence. Then slowly she smiled again, a genuine smile, brighter and warmer than before. It was a rare and dangerous display, but in that moment she did not care. "Perhaps you are right," she said softly. "Perhaps this is what I truly wish for. Not a title, not a name, but the honesty and courage that you carry in your heart." The court remained frozen. Even the most seasoned nobles dared not interrupt. They had seen the queen speak boldly before, but never so personally, never so humanly. One young noble whispered to another, "Is this affection from the queen herself?" Another shook their head. Impossible. She would never. Yet despite their doubt, everyone felt the weight of the moment. Later, after the ceremony ended, Elias was escorted to the palace gardens. The glowing plants lit the paths in soft blues and greens. The twin moons reflected on the water of the fountain, making the entire garden appear like a dream. Queen Zilara approached him quietly, not as a ruler to a subject, but as one being to another. "Elias," she said softly, "you have changed the way I see humans. You have changed the way I see myself." "Majesty," he said, "you have only shown me your trust and your honesty. That is enough to change anyone." She studied him in silence. Her hands rested lightly on the crystal railing. The light reflected across her glowing skin, making her appear ethereal. "I have ruled for centuries," she said finally. "I have known loyalty, wisdom, and power, yet I have rarely felt respect mixed with awe. You have brought me that feeling, and more." Elias met her gaze. "That is what humans hope to give the galaxy. Not conquest, not rule, but understanding and cooperation." She nodded slowly. "And you have given it to me, in ways I did not expect, ways that I will never forget." That night, the queen stayed awake in her chambers looking out at the stars. She thought of Elias, the human who had faced impossible odds, who had spoken truth to power, who had saved millions without firing a single weapon, and she realized something she had never allowed herself to feel before. A personal longing. Not for power, not for duty, but for the company of someone who truly understood courage, integrity, and the human heart. She whispered to herself softly, "Strange, how one fragile being can make eternity feel warm." Somewhere across the galaxy, Earth rotated slowly on its axis. On its blue oceans and green continents, humans lived their ordinary lives, unaware that one of their own had inspired an entire alien empire. By the following morning, news of the Queen's confession had spread quietly through the palace. Nobles and officials speculated endlessly. Some thought it a trick, others a political maneuver. Very few dared consider that it might be sincere, yet the Queen did not care what they thought. "Let them whisper," she said quietly to herself. "Let them see what they will. He is not theirs to judge. He is simply Elias." And somewhere in her thoughts a faint, unspoken hope blossomed, hope that one day the human she had admired might truly understand her, and she him. Elias, on the other hand, continued his duties calmly. He attended meetings, offered counsel, and walked through the halls with quiet dignity. Yet beneath his composed exterior, he too felt the stirrings of a bond, a connection beyond politics, beyond duty, beyond the vast distances between worlds. Both of them, human and queen, recognized something new, something neither title nor ceremony could contain. Trust and admiration born from courage and honesty. The entire palace had been shocked, but more importantly, the hearts of two very different beings had been quietly changed forever. Months passed since Ambassador Elias Grant had prevented war with the Vorath Dominion and witnessed the Queen's remarkable confession. The palace halls remained alive with whispers and curiosity. Nobles often spoke of the human envoy in quiet tones, unsure how to describe someone so ordinary yet so extraordinary. Elias, however, remained humble. He continued his duties as ambassador with the same calm demeanor, listening to the court, advising when needed, and learning about the ancient traditions of the Zinari Empire. But something subtle had shifted in the palace. The air itself seemed different. A sense of hope, trust, and even admiration had spread through the corridors like a gentle tide. Queen Zilara noticed it most. She often found herself thinking of Elias during quiet moments, wondering what his simple presence could teach her that centuries of power had not. She did not fully understand it, but a soft warmth had begun to fill her heart, an emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel. It was during a council meeting that the next challenge appeared. Reports came from distant Zinari colonies. Other alien races had begun noticing the human ambassador's influence. Humans, once dismissed as young and weak, were now being observed with caution and curiosity. Some empires sent envoys to study Earth's representatives. Others quietly altered treaties, reconsidering the strength of the human race. "Your Majesty," one general said nervously, "humans are gaining influence across the conquered. Some of our allies have expressed surprise and concern." The Queen's eyes flickered to Elias, who stood silently by the central chamber. His presence was calm, unaffected by the political tension. "It seems," she said softly, that one human has done more than an army of Zinari could. Elias inclined his head respectfully. Majesty, I only spoke what I believed. Humans have never had the chance to be heard before. Perhaps now they finally are. Her eyes softened. And perhaps, Elias, it is your courage that reminds us that strength is not always measured by fleets or weapons. Outside the palace, the twin sons of Xinar rose, casting long shadows across the crystalline towers. Elias often walked the gardens in the mornings, observing the quiet beauty of alien flora and listening to the soft music of the wind over the glowing plants. The palace, for all its grandeur, felt alive when he walked through it. One morning, as he wandered along a path lined with silver-leaved trees, the queen approached him quietly. Elias, she said, her voice soft but steady, the court talks endlessly of your deeds. The conquered speaks of your courage, and yet, you remain humble. Why? Elias looked at her and smiled gently. Majesty, courage is not a measure of pride. It is a measure of responsibility. I only do what I believe is right. That is all humans can promise. She nodded, thinking of the times he had faced impossible odds with nothing but words, logic, and heart. She realized that this human had taught her something she had never learned in centuries of rule, the strength of honesty and integrity. You have changed my empire, Elias, she said softly. Then the humans of Earth are honored, he replied humbly. Weeks later, a grand celebration was announced throughout Xinar Prime. The occasion was not just for Elias, but for the human race itself. The queen declared a festival honoring his achievements and the peace he had secured. Alien delegates arrived from nearby systems to witness the event. For once, humans were not seen as weak, but as beings worthy of respect and recognition. The palace was decorated with shimmering lights and banners depicting the blue and green planet of Earth. Children of Zinari nobility gathered to watch the human ambassador, their eyes wide with wonder. They whispered to one another, speaking his name with reverence. During the ceremony, the queen addressed the gathered crowd. Ambassador Elias Grant has shown us the courage and wisdom of humanity. He has reminded us that strength does not only come from power, but from the heart and mind. For that, the Zinari Empire is forever grateful. She stepped down from her throne and walked toward Elias once again. Her eyes glowed softly, full of admiration. Your deeds are remembered not as a human among Zinari, but as a being who inspired all of us. Elias bowed deeply. Majesty, it is an honor beyond words to serve. That evening, as the festival continued with music, lights, and dancing, the queen and Elias walked together through the palace gardens. For the first time, there was no formality, no title, only two beings sharing a moment of understanding. Elias, the queen said softly, I have ruled for centuries. I have commanded fleets, debated with generals, and seen empires rise and fall, and yet nothing has affected me as much as your presence here. He looked at her with quiet respect. Majesty, you have shown me that even the greatest power in the galaxy can still learn humility and hope. That is a gift I will never forget. They paused beside a fountain that reflected the light of the moons. For a moment, they simply stood in silence, each aware of the bond forming between them. Not as ruler and envoy, but as equals in courage, integrity, and spirit. You have become a legend, Elias, she whispered. Perhaps we are all legends when we act with courage, he replied. She smiled, the glow in her eyes softer than ever. Months passed, and Elias eventually returned to Earth, his mission complete. Yet the legacy of his deeds lived on. Across the Zinari Empire, his story became part of history. Children learned about the human who had prevented a war with words, not weapons. Scholars wrote of his courage and wisdom. The queen herself often recalled his calm presence and steadfast heart. He is more than a human, she said quietly to her advisors. He is a reminder of what we can become when we choose understanding over fear. Even the Vorath Dominion, who had once been enemies, now spoke of the human envoy with cautious respect. His actions had set a precedent. Diplomacy, courage, and truth could reshape the galaxy. Back on Earth, Elias returned to the simple life he had always known. Yet he carried the memory of the Crystal Palace, the glowing skies, and the queen who had confessed her admiration for him. He often thought of Xinar Prime, and sometimes when he looked at the stars, he imagined the queen watching from her balcony, just as he had. The human race had finally been recognized, not as conquerors, not as pawns, not as weaklings, but as beings capable of inspiring entire civilizations. And across the galaxy the legend grew, the human envoy who spoke truth to power. The human who stopped a war without raising a weapon, the human who touched the heart of a queen and changed an empire forever. In the palace of Zynar, Queen Zalara often stood by her balcony at night. The twin moons reflected on her crystal towers. She thought of Elias not as a ruler, not as a diplomat, but as a kindred spirit. Strange, she whispered softly, how one fragile being could make eternity feel alive. Her advisors sometimes asked what she thought of the humans. She would smile, a quiet private smile. They are more than their history, she would say. They are courage, hope, and heart. They remind us that even in a universe of giants, one being can make the stars feel alive. And so, the story of Elias Grant, the human envoy, traveled across the stars. It inspired humans, aliens, and Zynari alike. It proved that courage, kindness, and wisdom could change even the most rigid hearts. The galaxy remembered, and humanity had earned its place, not through conquest or technology alone, but through the enduring power of the human spirit.